Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the time might be and where you are in this wonderful world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Podcast, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. So today's episode is a little bit different, but I think also one that you're going to find super interesting. Like I always do, or have been doing more recently with these podcast episodes, I do have a special guest. However, the content here that I am delivering to you is a little bit different in that what I've done is taken a training module, something that I typically do with my clients, and I've taken that training module that I've run recently with my startup selling clients, and I've taken that content out and converted it into this podcast. So just to give you a little bit more context on what I mean by all this, as part of the work that I do with my startup selling coaching clients, in addition to the weekly calls that we do and the project management and all the other help that I provide to them, every month what I do is I choose a theme, I choose a topic that is super important to the clients that I have, and what we do is a deep dive on that particular topic. And this is what I call Tuesday training. So every Tuesday I host a live training that takes a certain module or a certain aspect of that theme, and we just do a deep dive on that topic. And it allows the clients that I have to learn more about that specific topic and allows us to go really deep and answer questions they might have about how to implement those particular strategies that we're covering. And so in this podcast episode, I have a special guest. Her name is Mia Paulus, and Mia is the founder of the Admin Center. The Admin Center is a company, and Mia is some person I've been working with now for a few years, first on the accounting front, and now she and her team help support me and my company as part of the work that I do with Sales Qualia. And so I had Mia join as part of the Tuesday training series to deliver a presentation to my clients on building and managing a virtual team, because that's where she is an expert. And I know this firsthand because she's been supporting me now for a couple of years, as I mentioned. And so this particular module is one of 6 modules that was part of a Tuesday training series focused on building, hiring, and managing a sales team. And so as part of that overall theme of building, managing, and hiring a sales team, we did a kind of a deep dive with Mia on the best way to build and manage a virtual team. And so we describe this in the podcast, and we define what we mean by virtual team in a number of different ways. It could mean a virtual team in that you are finding outsourced help through websites like Freelancer or Upwork. It could mean that you're finding help through companies like the Admin Center, who's based here in the U.S. in Boise, Idaho. It could mean that your virtual team are full-time employees. They are just working remotely in different states or even different countries. And so as startups grow, a lot of times finding talent and recruiting talent can take lots of different shapes and forms. And so because the virtual team aspect is one that is so important for startup teams to understand and to do effectively, I wanted to have Mia as a special guest and as an expert to deliver this particular training module to my clients. And because I feel like this particular topic and this information is so important, so valuable, I decided to kind of pluck this content out of what is normally reserved as exclusively available to my startup selling clients, and I decided to make it available to you publicly here on this podcast. So the form of the podcast is pretty similar to the ones that you're used to hearing from me here on the Startup Selling Podcast, where I am kind of the MC and I'm asking lots of questions and Mia is answering those questions. And the way that it's different is that Mia, because this was a training module for clients, we ran this as a webinar. So throughout the course of the podcast, you might hear her refer to slides, or you'll hear us refer to the presentation. Here, obviously, on an audio podcast, you don't have access to that. The content is very rich and very useful, regardless of whether or not you have access to the presentation. If you would like access to the presentation slides, just send me an email or send me a text or whatever, and we'll get those to you. So long introduction now done. Let's flip over to this episode of the Startup Selling Podcast, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci, and you will hear my conversation as part of the Tuesday training series with my clients on how to build and manage a virtual team. So here we go. Thanks for listening. Hey, everyone. Officially welcome to Tuesday training. And this is the module that we're going to be focusing on today is part of our Tuesday training series. It's a 6-part series that we're doing that's focusing on how to build your sales team. So one of the biggest challenges, one of the things that can be really frustrating for us, it's both a challenge and an opportunity, but also can be frustrating, is that as we're growing our teams, as we're growing our sales, oftentimes what that means is that we need to start adding new people to our team. And especially on the sales side, it can be really challenging and frustrating when we either don't hire the right person, we don't identify the right roles and responsibilities for those sales-related roles, and we don't have a really clear framework on which to hand over to that salesperson, so we can't monitor and track whether or not that person is in fact successful beyond just whether or not they bring in the sales. And so what we want to do with this Tuesday training series is cover a number of different topics. And so last week, the first module that we covered was identifying when to outsource and hire sales help. So we talked through a number of key principles on that, including things like having key performance indicators figured out for your company, identifying some key tasks that you might think about outsourcing or think about handing over to some sales help. And so today, what we're going to be focusing on with our very special guest, who I have on the line with me, is Mia Paulus. So, hey Mia, would you like to say hello to our team?
Hello, welcome. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So the way that we're going to run this today, I've just made Mia the presenter. And so as I mentioned in my announcement for this particular module, I've been working with Mia and her team at the Admin Center for most of this year in terms of outsourcing key tasks that are associated with my work. And I've been working with her team for much, much longer, just purely on the accounting side of things. And so based on my work with Mia and her team, I thought Mia would be a really good person to share some of her expertise around what it takes to build and manage a virtual team. And so I'm going to turn the mic over to Mia here. And before I do that, I would love to hear from the people on the call right now. So if you're logged in and you're listening to the webinar here, in the question box on the chat box, I'd love to hear what you think in particular is your biggest challenge, or what you think would be the biggest challenge when it comes to building and managing a virtual team. I know that some of you have done some outsourcing, whether that's programming and engineering work or accounting work, as I've done in the past, or other types of marketing work. And I'm curious to know, I'd love for you to write and type in the chat box or the question box what you think or what has been the most challenging aspect to building and managing a virtual team. So if you would just go ahead and pop in what you think would be most challenging, or what would be most frustrating, or perhaps a biggest lesson that you've learned when it comes to if you've tried to outsource in the past. It could be a good lesson. It could be a lesson that you would hope that you don't have to learn again. So if you're here, one of the things I want to make sure that we're doing is getting some interactivity from everyone. So in the chat box and the question box, let me know what you feel like would be the most challenging or most frustrating aspect to outsourcing. Cool. So Jonathan's saying, identifying people who are very self-driven and able to succeed in a virtual setting. Yeah, so I know that Mia is definitely going to be talking about that for sure, because she's had a lot of success with her team finding those self-driven people who are able to succeed in that virtual setting. Anybody else? No other challenges? Anita's asking a good question. So before she says, before I ask my question, can you clarify if you're using the terms virtual and outsourced synonymously? So that's an interesting question, and I guess I haven't officially introduced you yet, Nia. Do you define that differently when you think about virtual or outsourcing? Do you use those terms synonymously, or do they mean something very different to you?
That actually kind of leads me to my first slide, which I'll go to. First, thanks for having me. These are great questions.
All right, well, let's do it. Let's dive right in.
So I don't see the chat though. I don't know if.
Oh, I've got it. I've got the master control.
Oh, okay.
I am the domain virtual expert and control person here. So we want you to focus on the presentation and the content. I'll be the MC here.
Okay, great. So I guess they're both, and then they're also different. So there's really different types of virtual teams. You could hire your own staff and employees virtually. So you're managing them all, you're hiring them all, you have them whether all in the same area or all remotely. That's kind of could be used virtually, but also outsourcing could be considered a virtual team. So I think from a virtual standpoint, it could be either. It could be your own employees, or it could be an outsourced company. We actually went virtual about a year ago ourselves. We had the big office and the employees, and you think that that's what success means. Sometimes all the employees and the big office, and then as you'll see from the next slide, I'm a very non-traditional CEO, and I've been forced to kind of look at myself and be like, okay, how can I run this company most effectively given my situation? And I think that's what everybody has to do, is look at their own situation and see if it works. And it doesn't always work for everybody. And like the first person I mentioned in their chat, it's hard to find good people. And I think it's hard to find good people, whether it be in a virtual environment or in a non-virtual environment. So I'll get into that here a little later. But so also outsourcing. So your second option is you could outsource to virtual assistants, whether in the States or overseas. Our company is strictly US-based. Scott has used both us and I know overseas virtual assistants. So our company not only is a virtual company from the employees that we hire, but also we are an outsourcing type agency. So we kind of are both ends of the spectrum. So hopefully I can give you some feedback on both sides of the equation, whether you plan to hire just your own employees or whether you're looking to see if outsourcing is an option. And the third is a combination of both. Sometimes it's great to use somebody like us for just your own kind of executive assistant type tasks, but then, you still need that qualified help, and maybe you want that to be virtual. So you might have a hybrid of outsourcing company and your own employees. The benefit of outsourcing company is you can kind of get multiple skill sets without having to pay for multiple employees. So you might get, our focus is accounting, marketing, and administrative work here. And so, instead of having to go hire all three of those skill sets, or we even answer phones. So instead of not having to hire somebody for 12 hours to answer your phone calls, you could hire a company, an outsourcing company, to still cover your call volume without paying for 8 to 10 hours worth of work. So
cool.
Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's a good way to put some definitions on it. So if I were to try to summarize that, I'd say that virtual just means that your person you're working with is not physically with you, and that person might be a full-time employee or who you're paying as an outsourced contractor of some kind.
Yeah.
Whereas outsourcing is specifically basically finding outside contractors to do whatever task or work need to be done. And I think a lot of times when we think about outsourcing, usually, of course, like the idea of engineering or computer programming is the first kind of example of what we think of as outsourcing, whether you're outsourcing your work to places like India or Philippines or something like that. But from a virtual standpoint, that just means that the person or the team is not with you. So I'm glad we put some definitions on that. So I know we started getting a little bit into the content, and we've had some more people join. So Mia, why don't you, I would love you started talking about your company, and I'm using Mia as an example of, and her expertise in terms of how to think about virtual teams and outsourcing. So she's obviously going to reference her company. This is not obviously also designed to be a sales pitch by any means. If you want some more help or you want to learn more about what it means to set up a virtual team or how people like Mia could help you, then we'll certainly give you the opportunity to take that action if you want to, but that's not what we're doing here today. We want to make this education focused and help you identify, as we talked about, how to set up those virtual teams or those outsourced teams the most effective way, because ultimately what we're trying to do is help you get the most out of your time and your effort as a team leader, as a startup CEO. So Mia, why don't you tell us just a little bit about, love to hear a little bit more about your background and why did you choose to set up this company? Like, what was the need or the problem that you saw that made you decide that, hey, this is the company that we are going to be setting up here?
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, just to reiterate, excuse me, my whole focus is helping businesses, and if you have questions, whether it be about my pain points as a business owner, as an entrepreneur in this realm, we're having virtual, because mostly every question you ask, I'm sure I've either experienced or, I've had the moments where I've fired an entire office of employees, and that is never fun. You go in and you find you have one sour person that can sour an entire office, and it opens your eyes up to a lot of things. And so I hope I can be a resource for you in all areas, whether it's just starting a virtual team for yourself, outsourcing, whatever it be, even just HR issues, because I'm sure I've experienced them. To some degree. So I am a non-traditional CEO. As you can see, I have 7 children. We are a blended family, but we are blended, so I can only take credit for 5 of those, but I do have a 2-week-old who is at the bottom of the screen there. Scott thinks I'm crazy. I'm obviously an entrepreneur because I'm on this call with the 2-week-old, and but I love it. I love business, and I am able to do this because I work from home. And we do have a small office that we use for meetings and training and things like that. But we got rid of the big office, and I one of the things, I work better at home. I like being home. I'm kind of in my element, and not everybody can. And that's something that you have to, if you do decide to hire a virtual team, it's something you have to look at is, can they work from home? A little of my background. My background is in accounting and finance. That's what my degrees are in, from Boise State here. And, I worked for a couple CPA firms out of college and started to see, business owners and what they're struggling with. And, they needed more than just that traditional CPA environment. And so I actually had this idea. So the Admin Center, what we pretty much do is front and back office services for businesses. So anything from answering calls for clients, doing outbound calls, we even got into outbound sales calls, to administrative work. Scott's really allowed us, he's branched us out in a lot of different areas, which are fun. He'll say, can you guys do this? And as long as I can systematize it and streamline it, I'll entertain it. And, as long as we can keep the quality in check, for what we do, I do entertain the administrative tasks that we do. And then back office, we do the accounting and payroll and things like that for our clients.
So Mia, one of the things I wanted to ask you, you mentioned something, and one of the things for the people on the line, we're going to make this kind of Q&A along the way. Mia has some slides, and there's some things that she wants to share I think are important. We'll also, though, be doing a lot of kind of Q&A and me asking questions of her. So along the way, if there's something that she's expressing or something that I'm asking and you want to get your question answered, then please make sure to use that question box or the chat box and just pop a question in there, and I'll make sure that we get that answered before the end of the time that we have with Mia today. And so the first question I guess I wanted to ask related to some of what you just shared, Mia, was, when can someone, or how does somebody identify, like, now's the time to begin looking for some kind of virtual team, whether that is, and I guess I'll focus first on the kind of outsourced model where the person is not yet an employee, like a full-time employee. There's just somebody on contracted to do certain kind of work. How does somebody identify, like, now would be a good time, or how do they identify what tasks they might want to start outsourcing to a virtual person, such to make themselves more efficient? Like, what do you find when you're working with different companies is kind of a good trigger point?
Yeah. So a lot of what I do, like if we set up a call, a lot of what I like to do is to just get the business owner talking about what their pain points are. We all, honestly, most business owners can relate to a lot of the same things. And if you can find that mentor where you don't have to go through the same headaches that other people have experienced, by all means, it's a better way to go. So a lot of, like, I'm a list person, so I write down a lot of what I need to do. And sometimes that's a detriment to me because I have this never-ending list of things that never get done. And, my latest thing is I've been looking at my list and I'm like, I'm doing this stuff, but it's not really what I'm passionate about. A lot of actually what I do right now is a lot of back-end stuff, bookkeeping and accounting, which is what my background's in. But I've really developed a need for, or a love for marketing and for online marketing and what that means. And I find that what I'm doing isn't coinciding to what I want to be, to what I want to, the mother, the wife, the entrepreneur that I want to be. And so I've really done a lot of analyzing of that recently. And so I think if you're a list person, look at your current list of everything you have. If you're not a list person, write it all down and look at it and really look at it and say, one, am I accomplishing what's on my to-do list? And is my to-do list in coincide with who I want to be? And so I think that's one thing, is look at, okay, can I delegate any of this on my list? And I think, we had chatted yesterday, Scott, and you had brought up some good points as I was asking, who was going to be on the call.
Mm-hmm.
You really have to, to look at, am I, do I need to hire another person? Or can I delegate some of these things on my list to somebody else? And it is a big step. So what I recommend to people is just pick one or two things and just start with that. The biggest thing that I find when I talk to people is that they struggle just making that first step to get a sense of what it feels like to have a little sense of relief. So a lot of my clients, it might be, if they're like a service type company, it might be phone answering that they turn over to us. I know a lot of the people on the call are probably tech companies, so they might not get a lot of phone calls. It's probably a lot more email, things like that. And so it's seeing what's on I would suggest on your personal to-do list or on your follow-up with, like, what are your strengths? If your strengths aren't potentially sending out a welcome email or, whatever it is that you desire for your new leads or your new prospective clients or customers, what is it that's falling through the cracks? Because a lot of times you want to hold control of it, but if it's not getting done anyways, I can tell you that, an outsourced company probably can do it better than not doing it at all.
I'd like to interject here because there's a couple of really key points here that I'd like to accentuate. The list thing was a big thing for me. So I was a very big list person, and what I was finding is that I'd sit down for 30 minutes or an hour if I was on a train or somewhere, and I'm like, okay, these are all the things I got to get done. And I'd make a list of 25 things. And then I would spend the next 2 or 3 days working off of that list. And the problem for me was that I could get through 5 or 6 of those. And then I'd have to make a new list, and I'd be carrying over 15 things that I didn't get done from the first list and then adding another 10. And so instead of the list getting smaller, the list every time was actually getting bigger because I didn't have the time to finish all the things that I wanted to do the previous week. And so it became really challenging for me to do all the things I wanted to do in order to run the business and to make customers happy. I'm going to take back control of the screen for a second here, Mia, because one of the things we covered last week is this idea of you mentioned about listing out those tasks that you're doing each and every day. And this is something I learned from a person named Dan Sullivan, who runs a company called The Strategic Coach. And he talks about this exercise where take a sheet of paper and draw 4 concentric circles and begin on the outside circle with all the tasks you're doing that you don't like and you're not good at.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much. As you can see, we are now off and running with this podcast episode. And I wanted to take a moment to just ask a quick favor, if I could. If you would, if you're listening to this podcast for the first time or you're a repeat offender, every single month this podcast has been growing. We've had more downloads. We've had more listeners. We've had more subscribers, and that's so awesome. It makes me feel very satisfied to know that the content that I'm delivering here is valuable to you and to other people that are just now discovering the podcast. And so one of the things you can help me do is to help others find this podcast. So there's a couple of ways to do this. First, share it with a friend. Tell a friend if you're listening to this podcast, ask them to subscribe to it on iTunes. That'd be one way to help me out to continue to grow the number of listeners and the number of subscribers. The second thing you can do is actually go over to iTunes and leave a review. So if you like what you're listening to here, just leave a review and tell people that, hey, this is a 5-star podcast and something you should be listening to if you're doing startups and focused on selling. Because those reviews are a key element to iTunes, helping this podcast show up when people are doing searches for podcasts. And also iTunes uses the ratings and those reviews as a way to recommend this podcast to folks that are listening to other podcasts like it on iTunes. So those two things would be super helpful to me and help us continue to spread the word so that we can get more listeners, more subscribers, and give me more confidence to keep on putting forth this great content that we're doing here. So please subscribe to it, tell a friend, and I would also ask you to leave a review on iTunes. So that's it for the commercial, and let's get back to the Tuesday training module that we are now presenting as this week's podcast with Mia Paulus.
So for me, as an example, is anything related to my website. I don't like doing it, and I suck at it. Like installing a plugin, while it could take 3 seconds, somehow, some way, it takes me 33 hours, and I screw something up on my website. So just updating a plugin is something I don't like, and I'm not good at. The second tier are the things that I don't like doing, but I'm at least competent at. So like accounting, I can do my accounting. I don't like to do accounting, but once I sit down and I focus, I can get all of my, my expenses in the right place. So I'm competent at it. Circle number 3, all the things I enjoy doing and I'm good at. So things that I enjoy doing are things like workshops, and I'm good at doing workshops. People tell me when they come to a live workshop, they learn a lot, and it's really cool. And then ultimately the things that I'm genius at are things that are just kind of my superpowers. So whether it's setting up content like this, working with clients on a one-on-one basis, I'm helping them solve problems. Those are kind of things that I'm genius at. And so what Dan Sullivan had suggested was, if you're looking for a place to start your outsourcing, at least go with that first circle and the second circle and find ways to get those things off of your plate. And the reason to do this is that the things that you don't like, that you're not good at, or things you're good at, there are other people in this world who actually do like doing it and who are fabulous at doing it. So why not just give them the opportunity to do what they like to do and what they're good at? And then that way you can just focus on circles number 3 and 4, things you enjoy and you're good at, things that you're genius at.
Yeah, that's great.
And then, so I'm going to flip the presentation back to you, Mia, and while you're taking control of that. The other thing I really wanted to stress that you mentioned, and we talked about this a bit yesterday, and you mentioned it just a moment ago, which is like, who is the person you want to be? So one of the things that is really challenging for many of the people that I work with, a lot of times there's this perspective that the startup CEO is this 23-year-old hotshot out of Stanford or NYU or something like that, right? Well, truth is, many of the people I work with are people like me and people like you, Mia. While we might not have 7 kids, we have families, we have responsibilities at home, and we have all these things that we want to do. So aside from just making the business more efficient, looking for ways to make yourself happier. And, Mia, you were commenting to me yesterday that you're like, when we first started working together, it seemed like you would spend a lot of time on Sundays. We get emails from you on Sundays, and we get, tasks to do and those kinds of things. And then recently you haven't been doing that on Sunday. And I said, yeah, the reason that I don't work on Sundays anymore is because I've learned how to outsource those things. And then now it leaves me that time on Sunday afternoon to spend with my family. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have my own business, was so that I could spend more time with my family. So it helps me be the person I want to be, which is being a better dad, being a better husband. So, keeping these things in context, not just from a business standpoint, also from like the macro view of who we want to be, why do we start a business, and who do we want to be outside of work, to our families, to our friends, to our, some people want to be responsible to, other groups, civic groups or church groups and those kinds of things. And if we're constantly burdened with tasks that are overwhelming our day, then it cheats ourselves from the freedom that we want as we aspire to be entrepreneurs. So anyway, I know that was a lot, but there's a couple things that you mentioned. I want to really make sure to accentuate those.
Yeah, no, that's great. Honestly, I love these kind of webinars a lot better than I've done some where all I'm doing is talking and there's nothing on the other end. I really struggle with that because I really like the interaction back and forth, and that's why I like doing live ones better, even though I do like the virtual, obviously, but I like seeing people's faces and expressions, and that you don't get that in webinars, unfortunately. So.
Yeah. Well, I know, Mia, you had set up you had some other kind of content you wanted to share around some key principles and some fears and frustrations that people have. Is there something specific that you'd like to share? So, take a moment to think about what you want to share next. And in the meantime, while you're doing that, Mia, for the people on the line, as I mentioned before, if you have questions about what we're covering, if there's something that pops in mind, if there's an idea or something, a thought you want to share, just pop it in that question box, pop it in the chat box so that I can make sure to address it or bring it up with Mia. So, so like I said, Mia, I know you have a lot of stuff, and we obviously won't be able to get through all of it, but what are some next things that you feel like are important to share when it comes to building out that virtual team or identifying what tasks to outsource?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of go over kind of the high points of a couple of these slides. First, you need to decide, why do you need or want a virtual team? And we kind of talked about that, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But, what is, for me, it was be able to be an entrepreneur but still be around my family. The way it came up was, a lot of being a growth company and relaunching this model just a few years ago. Again, it was people expected me in the office, and that was and it was 40 hours. And I realized now it was a lot of the people I had hired. Now I have great people that respect who I am as a mother, but also that I can be a good business owner as well. And so it allows me to, with technology, it allows me to control some of those. I don't care if people show up in holy jeans or don't take their garbage out in the office. And I'm not a drama person, so I really struggled with those kind of things. And so it allows me to focus on the key things and finding employees that value those great relationships and the empathetic relationships and the trust relationships. And I like those good those solid relationships like that. And so when I don't find employees like that, I really struggle having them. And so that's going to kind of lead me to these three principles I want to talk about, but I'll briefly kind of go over these fears and wants with virtual teams. And although they're there, I can tell you, I won't spend a lot of time on all of these, but they can be resolved. Because one of the fears is I can't see if people are working. Well, how many of you are in an office right now and you don't see the other people working? That with technology, that's kind of the way it is now. We're in our offices, right, and we IM each other. In fact, the other day, we were all working in the office and somebody was on the phone and I didn't want to interrupt them, so we're literally a foot away from each other, IMing each other. And so even though it might be you're in an office, unless you're in a bullpen type environment, most likely you're probably need to control and you're going to use a lot of the same tools that you would in a virtual environment anyways. And I know with wanting with the virtual team, a lot of times you want to reduce HR burden. It doesn't go away, but like for me, I'm able to reduce the HR burdens that I couldn't stand. Okay, why don't you take your garbage out? I don't understand. So those kind of things that I knew I could at least eliminate. And it forces me to, I'll go to the next one, because it forces me to focus on results. I knew that I spent the last about year and a half really working on procedures internally with certain technology and really focusing on making sure that I could look at the results. No longer do I care, again, if somebody doesn't take out their trash or they come to work in holy jeans. I just care if they are producing. Now, I am reasonable in that I know that results can be my fault if they're not being done right, and results can potentially be the employee that I hire's fault. And so, or maybe we're not focusing on their strengths, or whatever it is. So results, although very, very important, is more of the lagging indicator, so to speak, where processes and relationships, communication are more the leading indicators of success. And so that being said, I think you had mentioned yesterday, a lot of maybe what some of the people on the call might be struggling with are the processes with, okay, do you need to hire another salesperson, or potentially could you look at the processes that are in place and potentially delegate some of those out to where you're able to just focus on what you're good at, back to that quadrant thing of, do what you like and do what you're good at as well.
Well, that's a good point. Like in terms of the task list, and just to kind of start drilling more into the sales hiring part of this, a lot of times when I'm working with teams, they might feel like, oh, I'm overburdened by the amount of work that the sales part of my business creates for me, right? I've got inbound leads coming to my website that I have to reply to, even if there's some automated system there. Then if somebody replies back, then I have to reply to their reply, and now all of a sudden I've got this whole set of conversations going on with some inbound leads potentially. Or there's, hey, I'm going to go to this conference or this meetup or this event, and now I've got to follow up with all those people. I got to send them an email, and I've got to send them a link to my website, and I've got to connect with them on LinkedIn. And then I've got so those are just kind of like very top of the funnel, really basic early stage sales tasks. So then on top of that, now I get somebody who's engaged, and now I've got to set up a meeting with that person, and I've got to find out who else on their team should be invited. And I have to make sure that they have GoToMeeting or or some other web management software, or web sharing software that we're going to be using. And then I have to do the demo, and then I have to do the post-demo follow-up. And so you kind of go through the whole sales pipeline all the way through to, okay, now we're going through, audits. They want to do a security audit. They need to see certain documentation that needs to be sent to them, and I have to call to follow up to make sure they receive the documentation. And then we finally get the contracts, and there's all this stuff back and forth with the contract. So you end up with this enormous task list that goes into especially doing an enterprise level sale. And immediately we feel like, man, if I could just find a person to handle all of that stuff, then I could go back to focusing on being the CEO, whether focusing on product or engineering or hiring or recruiting or capital raising. And I think a lot of times, and this is where the idea of doing this, looking at sales from a task perspective, then maybe there's just certain slices of the sales process that you could hand over to someone, which is, for example, when I go to a conference and I collect 10 business cards, I snap a picture of them and then send them to a virtual assistant with really clear instructions that here's the email template to use. Thanks so much for meeting me at the XYZ conference. Really glad to meet you. Here's a link to our website. And oh, by the way, I'm going to send you a LinkedIn connection request. And then also have the assistant log into your LinkedIn account and find that person on LinkedIn and send them a connection request with a personalized message that you're also specify. Like, hey, for my email, I want to connect here on LinkedIn. Looking forward to chatting in the next 2 weeks. Signed, Scott. So now those, what seem like, man, I would never want to outsource that stuff. But when you think of it that way, well, that could be like 2 hours of time. If I have 10 people I have to send emails to and LinkedIn connections requests to, it could be like 2 hours of time. Now I can just outsource that. It gets done. So instead of trying to hire a salesperson to handle everything in sales from prospecting all the way down to closing the contract, maybe there's just slices of these tasks I can hand over to a virtual or outsourced person that allow me to then focus on just critical parts of the sales process, like the product demo, like answering security questions, like doing contract negotiations. So I think it's a big part of focusing on the outsourcing being task-based as opposed to hiring a full-time person to do sales.
And if I may interject on that a little bit, one of the things that, if you don't have everything together yourself, if you go and hire an employee, they're going to find out that you don't have everything together. And as much as we want people that we hire, this is a mistake I make, is you think everybody's passionate about your business like you are, or they're going to create procedures and create those things like you would. And most people aren't that way, and to find them are hard. And if I do find them, I really try to keep them. But you have to get your stuff together in order to attract and retain good employees. And so sometimes you have to go through those steps and create those processes that you need, or rely on certain outsourcing companies' processes, so you don't have to recreate the wheel on certain things to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. In fact, just for context, so Anita's asking a question about, does my virtual team or do my virtual assistants have access to my email? Short answer is yes. The longer answer is they have access to everything. And what I mean by that is, first of all, just to show you, here's a list of checklists. I actually had, so this is interesting from a meta standpoint. I asked somebody on Mia's team to make a list, to send me a list of all of the checklists that I have sent to them. So that was the task that I sent, because I constantly build checklists. Whenever there's a process I want to outsource, then what I do is I go into Evernote and, one sec. And I just type out what I want them to do. So here's a checklist for setting up a new user to the member site. So whenever somebody is new and they join Startup Selling and we start working together,
these are all the things that I need to happen in order to get that person set up to get access to the member site. So everything down to screenshots and step by step, step 1, 4, 2, 3, 4, all the way through to making sure that everything is working, right? So that's just like a view of these are things that I've built over time, but this is the process piece that Mia was showing on her screen as kind of like number 2. And then to answer specifically, Anita, your question, the team, I actually have a Google Doc, which I'm not going to share because it has passwords and everything in it, but the virtual team has access to everything. They have access to my Facebook account, my LinkedIn account, my email. They have access to my bank account. Like Mia's team could theoretically go in and transfer money out of my bank account into their bank account if they really, really wanted to. Now, they would never do that. But that's the level of trust that I've been able to develop with her and her team. And again, this is just my relationship with Mia. Whatever team you're working with, those things take time, right? So you start with really basic tasks. Like for me, this new account checklist, I was finding that it was taking me a long time. Every time somebody signed up, I'd be like, wow, that's really awesome. Somebody's new client. We can't wait to get them set up. And then it was like 45 minutes to an hour of all of these things I had to do in order to get them up and running. I had to set them up on the member site, to send out the getting started checklist. I had to make sure they got invited to the Facebook group. I had to make sure they were signed up for the weekly sales acceleration calls and the Tuesday trainings like this one. And like, these are things that that's like clearly in the circle of things that I'm competent at, and I don't like doing them. It's not that I don't enjoy helping people sign up. It's just that I know my time could be spent focusing on how can I now begin thinking about strategically how I can help that new client. So that's just a way to kind of change your thought process a little bit if you have some questions about how to handle working with a virtual assistant, or in the case of your question, Anita, I've been able to give access to the team to everything pretty much that I need them to have access to.
And like on our end,
I'll flip the presentation back to you, but yeah, go ahead, Mia.
I was just going to say, and on our end, we do the best we can to secure things as much as we can. In your case, you do have an open document that shows passwords, but in most of our cases, we'll lock down the passwords to where employees can't even see the password. They can log in. We use a security password software called LastPass. So only people that actually can see your Google Docs, so maybe 1, maybe 2 people here can see your main password sheet, but anybody else, for them to log in, we'll use our LastPass software, which if you're a tech company, you probably have heard of that. But what that does is allows them to log into a website without them viewing the password. So I can lock down if there was ever we sever ties, which I've done this before, where with an employee, the first thing I do is I lock off their access to LastPass and any other softwares. So it's just that added, so there are added security things that we try to put in place to minimize that, as much as we can, obviously. So.
Yeah. And so looking at these 3 factors that we were talking through, obviously results, it doesn't matter if somebody's there or not. It's making sure that this is meritocracy. If you're doing the work you need to get done and you're reachable when I need to reach you, then great, right? That's all that really matters, because in most work environments, people are working on different projects. Sometimes people are traveling. We're not around together that much anyway. Secondly, you're talking about process here, which is a lot of what I just showed, building out these checklists. And, like roughly one a week is what it's come to for me. It's like every week I seem to find one other task I've been doing that I can now outsource. So the most recent one is actually setting up and sending contracts. So whenever, again, that's something I used to own. If somebody said, hey, I want to sign up and get going with you and learn from you over the next 2 months, then I would personally go and get them into DocuSign and send them out. And I thought, this is something I can outsource. Like, there's a reason for me to do this. And so the most recent one, I was actually typing on my mobile phone when I got an email from someone that said, hey, I want to do, and I said, great. And I said the mobile phone, I was sitting in a car and sent off that task, and lo and behold, it got done by the end of the day and the person signed it. So having that process in place is key. And then, that leads into what we were just talking about in terms of relationships and communication. And Mia, I'd love for you to talk more about this in terms of the day-to-day intrapersonal and intraday work when it comes to, how do you build relationships and how do you make sure that the virtual team is happy and that they're clear and that you're clear about expectations and what needs to be done.
Yeah, really having a virtual team forces you to focus on this because this needs to be done whether it's in an office or not. But because you're limited to a virtual environment, you have to clearly communicate, what needs to get done. And you have to make sure that, because things can be misconstrued in emails, we've both experienced that state, or Scott, in that situation. And so in our environment where we answer phones, a lot of times we can't do as much virtual conferencing or video conferencing as we would like. So we do a lot of IM. We use Google for ours, and Google Hangouts. I think you used Slack before, Scott.
I've used Slack before, yeah.
Yeah. So there's different IM tools that work well, and the little emoji, the icons are priceless, because you really can get a sense, or exclamation marks, and all those things are so important when you're communicating, because it is so easy to think the wrong way about things, and the big thing is communication. We had just hired somebody a few months back that we let go pretty quickly. It was like, okay, we hired her, and some people can't handle the virtual environment, and we had given her tasks to do, and by 2:00 it was like she's asking for the login for something which proved she hadn't worked on it yet, and communication has to be both ways. I purposefully gave her a set of tasks to do come morning, and I needed to know if she could do those on her own and be able to kind of pace herself and get through it, and so by her not getting back to me until 2, it was like, okay, what has she done for 6 hours, and
right.
And so communication is both ways, and I have great staff right now that is really good at that, so it really has given me when you have bad employees and you have good employees, that's when you can really start to see the key traits that make, now I can spot them really quickly. And I used to hold on to relationships a lot longer, or, employees that, you keep thinking, okay, they're going to figure it out, and they're going to, and you realize that to make the right virtual team, it's getting the right people on board too. There's the Good to Great book that I always like. It's not only getting the right people on the bus, but getting the right people in the right seats. And so, like for me, I always consider, if they have a lot of good attributes, I also want to look at, okay, what are their strengths, and are they in the right seat, or can I put them in a better place to do better? But some just can't work at home either. That's a key thing that you have to, in the interview process, make sure that you ask the right questions to see if they can handle it at home.
Yeah, and that's a situation where maybe you're hiring somebody who's submitted a resume for some part-time work, or even a full-time employee that wants to be virtual. Like there's an additional screening burden that you have on yourself to do that kind of analysis. Like, can this person handle work from home? Are they going to do well in a virtual environment? Which is different than when you work with an agency, or you find somebody even on Upwork or freelancer.com. You can see the reviews and see like this person's completed 100 projects and they've had a 95% approval rate. Well, then you know that person has been successful at handling tasks and handling projects virtually. Or working with somebody like you, where you're going to go and do that screening and hiring and only get to bring people into your team that are going to be good at that. So it's just something to think about considering, something to consider when you're looking at tasks, and again, even like sales related stuff. Maybe it's work, maybe there's some tasks that you think you need a salesperson to do, but maybe you don't need an actual salesperson to do some of that stuff. You just need to be really good at documenting the process and handing over those tasks to a non-sales virtual team in an agency.
Well, that's the beautiful thing, is you don't have to go through the headache of it. And we take on that headache and that burden of recruiting, and it's tough. The economy, the economy is different now than it was even 5 years ago, even I think 2 years ago. I mean, Boise, we're located in Boise, Idaho, and the economy here is great. It's booming, and we're always making the Forbes top place to live because of cost of living and jobs, but everybody's hiring, and it's tough to find good people. And so when we, if to hire, I actually kept this quote on from another webinar I had done. It's expensive to hire, and if you get the wrong person, to have to rehire or say, oh, they're not selling. You hire a salesperson. My husband's a self-employed person. We've hired lots of sales guys through him, and it's expensive if you hire the wrong salesperson. And it's hard to find unentitled salespeople anymore too that have your best interest in mind, that don't want 50% of the company, or that just truly want to earn their own keep, go out and sell for you and make a living. And so it's the conversations that I'm having with my clients are way different than they were before 2008, after the crash.
Yeah, and in this article, the article citing a cost of a bad hire being $25,000 to $50,000. I would venture to say that a bad sales hire, particularly when you're talking about enterprise products, enterprise selling, where in some cases the sales cycle is 6 months or 12 months. Even if we try to reduce those sales cycles with doing things like pilot programs and those kinds of things, the cost of blowing leads, you go to a conference, let's say as a startup, right? You decide to invest in a conference and you spend $10,000 for a booth, and you spend another $5,000 for travel, and it's a whole week of your time. So you're $15,000 and a week of your time. Then you come out of there with 20 leads and you hand them over to your salesperson, and the salesperson does nothing with them. And assuming those were pretty well qualified leads, so now the cost is much greater than just the time and the salary you paid to that person. It's all the cost of all. What if 2 of those 20 turned into paying customers that were each going to be $100,000 customers? Now, you've really, in a lot of ways, a bad sales hire can set you back sometimes as much as a year when it comes to growing your company. And that's one of the reasons I'm so strongly opinionated around, first outsourcing some of your sales tasks so that you can identify what is your process. Do you have a process, first of all? And if you have a process, is it one that you can explain to someone that they can follow those tasks and do the things you need them to do, starting with things like handling inbound leads or connecting with people on LinkedIn, because that's going to give you a sense for, whether or not you have a process that you can hand over, and is that process successful? And then by doing that over the course of a couple of months, that's going to give you a really clear indication as to whether or not you really need a full-time salesperson, or you just need somebody to handle the 18 tasks that take a ton of time and are preventing you from closing the 2 or 3 big deals you need to get. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so strongly opinionated, like I said, on first outsourcing or doing work virtually, because it forces you to have the process like you were talking about, Mia. It forces you to think about the results, and it significantly reduces your costs and your risk from a business standpoint.
Yeah, it forces you to articulate it, because you have to communicate and you have to start with the baby steps of the process. Okay, what, and we can work, we work with clients to help build out that process if need be. If you don't have a lot of the tools and don't know how to, start, we can start with the first one. But it's a really good point.
Yeah, and there's definitely been cases like I will gladly raise my hand, and there'll be a task that I send over, and then it'll get done exactly the way I set up the checklist. And the way I set up the checklist is not the way I thought I set up the checklist. So I'm like, Amber, I'm a little confused because you did this, this, and this. And like, why did you do that? And she's like, well, here's a link to the checklist. And I did exactly like you said. And I'm like, oh shit, the checklist is wrong. I'm like, oh, okay, well, now it's on me. But that's like a really good example of like making sure you understand your own process, because that's in a documented format. Imagine if I'm just like hiring some salesperson and trying to verbally explain to them how I handle all the 20 things around selling. Like, there's no way that person's going to be able to replicate those things. By setting up these teams and setting up these tasks, it forces you to document that process, which turns into kind of like an operations manual for your selling. And that gives you the ability to then, when you do hire, make sure that the people you're hiring are able to do all of the things in those task lists, and that you've got some accountability there to say, well, like, look, this is how we run sales. These are all the things you need to do. And if you're not doing those things, then you're not succeeding in this job.
Yeah, and I can't say that, we as an outsourcing company are perfect. And, as you mentioned, you're not always perfect, Scott, but neither are you going to have perfect employees, And so it's not about perfection as much as I have a need to be perfect and I cringe when we're not perfect and all of that. It's not realistic to think that that's ever going to happen. But you always want to analyze, how could you have done better? How could I have communicated better? How could I, even down to, it comes down to trust. It comes down to being empathetic. It comes down to all those different key relationship characteristics. Yeah. And it's interesting because I always think of, it's really hard to be a business owner if you don't think about psychology and the psychology of yourself, making sure that you've worked through issues on your, with yourself, because that's in essence, you're going to have better employees if you're intact, mentally,
yeah.
you'd say.
Yeah. No, that's great. So 4 minutes. And so two things I want to accentuate here as we're kind of reaching the top of the hour. So one is, if there are any other questions that you have for me, this would be a great time to ask that, so we can make sure we get that into the time that we have together. And separately, Mia, if there's any other kind of key principles or ideas that you feel like, man, if anything, when people leave here, I want them to know this one thing I haven't covered yet, what would that be? So looking in the question box, we have a question that's coming in here, but Mia, in the meantime, why don't you, we'll come over to that question, Anita, in just a second. And so Mia, you got some tools and resources here that look pretty interesting, so why don't you share those?
Okay. One of my pastimes is researching software, researching tools, and I've spent hours doing it, and sometimes it can be mind-boggling. I mean, the things that a lot of you are probably selling your software and things like that, I'm the one that, tests it all out and does trials and really, and we use so much software here internally because we log into tons of our clients' CRM softwares, and so it's something that, if you feel free to, we can set up a conference call after this to, either sometime later this week or next week. I'm happy to do a conference call to, figure out what your pain points are, to figure out if there's different tools like these that you want to use. Scott actually got me into Jing. You can do free 5-minute videos, and it's great because in the moment when you're doing you can do a quick training, and I'll send the link to one of the girls here to review so that they know how to do it, and then you can upload them to a private YouTube channel and have them available for training. Or, there's a lot of different things that you can do. But more than anything, if I had to say, you're going to get overwhelmed with all the different solutions out there and all the different ways you can do it and all the different ways you can have a virtual team and why do you need a virtual team. But, really you have to look at your pain points, look at what works for you, and really analyze, who you are, who you want to be, how it's going to work, what kind of lifestyle do you want to have. And sometimes I get envious of other countries and their, and their lifestyle or their shorter work weeks. And, because we can get phone calls and emails throughout the entire day, and you have to really be regimented to keep your life in control. Otherwise, literally business and this work will control you. And so I guess that's kind of my 2 cents is, really figure out who you want to be and figure out what it takes to get there. And really the way things are priced now, it's honestly cheaper than hiring somebody else. Like, we charge based on tasks. So we'll things we've looked at, okay, this procedure is about this many tasks, and we've created a macro to where we apply that macro with that many tasks for whatever it is that we've done for them. And so really it's, what you're going to pay a lot of times, based on what you give us. And so that's kind of, I guess, my 2 cents. Let me, you mentioned, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, my goal is actually to spend a good sign for me is when I'm spending more money with my services, not just with Mia, but I spend money with Upwork, for example, and I have another freelancer who does copy editing for me that I pay through a separate channel. So I've got different virtual and outsourced work in different places. And a good signal for me is that if my bill
for those outsourcing and virtual teams is going up, that means it should be a good indication that I am spending more time focusing on things that I enjoy and that I'm good at and things that I'm genius at, right? So it's kind of like people when they groan about their tax bill, like, oh, I had to pay a lot for taxes. Well, if you paid a lot of taxes, it means you made a lot of money. So if I have, a big bill from an admin group, that means I'm able to outsource functions with my business and even my personal life. I mean, there's things that even though I hadn't intended for outsource people to handle, like me and Mia's team, for example, I had some travel stuff, but I'm like, I just do not want to call United Airlines to deal with this right now. So here's the email. Here's what needs to be done. Please call United and cancel this trip and get the miles redeposited in my account. And turns out that even better, Mia's team was able to negotiate that the redeposit fee that United would have charged me, they were able to negotiate it that they waived that fee. So not only did I outsource the tax, but they saved me $600, which was really awesome. So when it comes to like looking for places to outsource, don't limit it just to the work that you're doing within your company or even within sales. I mean, think of it more broadly is that there are personal things that take a lot of time that you could outsource because that might be something that could be a big benefit to you as well. So, all right. So, Mia, I'm going to ask one more question here from Ania's. She's asking, can you touch on what is the retention rate at your company? Like, how often do you change admins? And I think maybe the underlying question is, look, if I work with any group, whether it's somebody like you as an agency or working with a freelancer, at Upwork or something like that, I think that the real question here might be, well, if I go and teach and train somebody to do certain processes for me, what happens if that person's no longer available? What happens if that person leaves the company? How do I prevent having to retrain and reteach every couple of weeks or months? And so how do you typically, either do you have a high churn rate or do you have a high retention rate with your employees? And what do you do in the case where somebody who maybe has even been successful working with you has decided they want to move on to another step in their career, or they want to go do something else? Like how do you handle those changes so that the client doesn't feel this burden of having to retrain or reteach?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So from our standpoint, I put a lot of onus on us and on me to minimize the burden from the client as much as I can. Obviously it's not always 100%, but one of the ways that we mitigate that is to cross-train as much as we can on the tasks that we do. So we at least have, the way we're set up here is we have pods. And so a client is assigned to a pod which has about 3 to 5 workers in there. And so typically, there's accounting professional, there's admin, a couple admin, and then we have a marketing, and we're looking for another marketing right now to be in that in Scott's pod. And so from that standpoint, we want to cross-train, like Amber in Scott's pod has cross-trained Renee on majority of the tasks that are done. A lot of the ones that she isn't, I'm cross-trained on. And so from that standpoint, it's not, Amber, because she does it all the time, most likely, let's say something were to happen to her or she left, but she told me she never was leaving. So we hold her to that. No. And, yeah. But if something were to happen, we could pick up probably 80-90% without any hiccup. Now, again, there's probably the 10% that we haven't cross-trained on. As far as, and so, again, it's not 100%, the client's not going to feel it at all, but for the most part, that's something that I'm always looking at, always trying to figure out ways to better mitigate that loss for the client. Because like I said, I've done the other way where I literally let everybody go and you have to start over, so because I've had that pain point, I now can appreciate good employees and I appreciate the ones that do retain. So for instance, like with Amber, and then the people we have now are so good that if the environment is good and they're paid well enough and they feel appreciated and they have the flexibility, like Amber, she can go, the reason why we also launched virtual was because they have the ability to she can go and pick up her daughter from school, and then she comes back and then works, and she still works more than she should because she's kind of like me in that regards. But just being able to, if I'm willing to give to them a certain amount, I'm able to retain them, and so a lot of it comes down to, again, that relationship and that communication. And so right now we've had the same staff for quite a while, but it's something that I'm always looking at, and finding ways to do better.
And the other thing I would say is, I think that you mentioned the cross training, which I was happy to learn about, that I didn't even know was happening, because all of a sudden I started getting some emails from Renee and from also somebody else who does some work with me, as Dawn, on your team. And all of a sudden I started getting responses from these emails like, oh yeah, I took care of that for you, done, sign Renee or sign Dawn. I'm like, oh, okay, I guess there's more people working on my stuff. And so what I would say is, going back to show my screen, it's kind of like, for me, it's good that I've got a team of people that are able to cross-train. It also, though, I think speaks well to my ability to document a process, because if I can teach, if my process is good enough and clear enough that somebody else can even explain it to someone else and I'm not there, that means it's a good, clear process, right? So then fundamentally, I think really the burden, while yes, you want to pay attention to an agency that might have a lot of turnover or might not have the same controls in place that Mia might have, really it comes back to, it's our responsibility as an entrepreneur or the person who's hiring the outsource company or the virtual company to make sure that we're really clear. And if we have one person we're super reliant on because they know how to do my stuff, and it's all in their head because I've told them 17 times, well, then we're right back to where we started, which is not really seeing the benefits over the long run of outsourcing and having a virtual team and building the checklists and processes and procedures that we need. So,
yeah, that's something we ran into. Sorry, go ahead.
No, we're just a little past the top of the hour, and I know, Mia, you've been super generous with your time today. So what I'd like to do is just, if there's, I mentioned at the top of the call that, if some folks had some questions or they wanted to get in touch with you, I wanted to give them the opportunity to do that. So a couple ways to do that. One, obviously, you guys can just email me and let me know that you want to do a consultation call with me or something like that. But Mia, is there a way that folks can get a hold of you, or what do you suggest for someone who is just trying to continue their own education about what they can outsource, what they can move to a virtual team, and what's possible?
Yeah, if they just want to send me an email. In fact, I should have put it on this slide. In fact, I could type it real fast on it. Let me get in there. I'll put my email address on a slide here. If you just want to email me, we could do a couple things. You can just, if you just want to drop me an email with a question, or we can also, or drop me an email saying, hey, I'd like to schedule a time to talk with you on the phone. That works for me. So it's ouradmincenter.com, Mia. I would, again, like Scott had mentioned, even though, we are in the business of outsourcing and we'd love your business, obviously, that's not what my passion is about. It's never been about money for me. I literally love working with businesses, and I've loved trying to get businesses not to do the same mistakes I have done, to educate them, to whatever it is. I mean, that's really why my passion is developing online marketing and developing an online presence for myself, is because I just want to see businesses be successful, see them not think they have to have a huge office and tons of employees to be successful. There are tools, and Scott, you're a testament to that, of ways to be more successful. Scott, you seem busier now, yet like you said, like we had talked about yesterday, you now aren't working on Sundays and have that time for your family, and yet you seem busier, like you're doing more volume than you were when we last talked, and it was that way. And so, that's my honestly, my passion. And so even if you're looking just to hire your own virtual team with employees and you want to talk about a few things about ways to improve it, tools you could use, like I said, I've researched a lot of software, look at a lot of tools, all that stuff. I've had HR burdens, good and bad.
Yeah.
So please email me, and you can either chat through email, or we can set up a conference call to get on the phone and talk, whatever.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Mia, thank you again. You've been super generous with your time, not just with the hour that we spent here with the people on the line, also all of the preparation, the conversations we've had getting ready for this, putting together the slides. It's really awesome and I really value our relationship, and I really appreciate that you've taken the time to help out my clients to help them learn how to scale their business. So we'll get the recording up on the member site in case you want to hear it again or share it with your teams, get some ideas up. And I think I might also, maybe I'll just turn this into a podcast as well, take this recording and put it up on my Startup Selling podcast, because I think this is something that would be valuable to the greater population as well. So,
Great.
All right, cool. Well, I think let's wrap it up here. Everyone, thanks so much for taking time out of your day. If you have any other questions about this or the topic, then please let me know. And looking forward to catching up with everyone very, very soon. All right? You all have a great rest of the afternoon. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Okay, there you have it. That is the end of the training module. And again, as I mentioned, this is one of 6 modules that were part of a 2-month, 2-day training series that I typically do with my clients, part of the Startup Selling program. So this module, as you have now learned, is focused on building and managing a virtual team. A couple of the other modules in this series focused on assessing your startup to know when it was time to hire. We also, in later modules, talked about how to source talent, how to go and recruit talent, how to do interviewing, screening, sales compensation programs, and ultimately, we also talked about onboarding and managing your sales team, all part of that 6-part training series. So this was module number 2 of the 6 as part of that Tuesday training series. And as I mentioned, something I only typically make available to my clients. However, I felt like this content was so important to the startup listeners out there that I wanted to make sure to share it with as many people as possible. So hope you've enjoyed the podcast, and I hope you could tolerate that it was just a little bit different than normal. If, again, as I mentioned in the beginning in the introduction, if you feel like the presentation slides would be useful to you, please let me know. I'd be happy to make those presentation slides available to you for this particular training module. And if you have any questions about the work that I do with the Startup Selling program, if you're looking for a little bit of sales help, if you're looking for sales strategy, then that's what I do. I help startups to build their sales process, to grow their prospects and pipeline, and to convert those prospects and pipeline into paying customers. So you can learn more about what I do at Sales Qualia. That's Sales Qualia, QUALIA.com. You'll see lots of blog posts. You'll see links to other podcasts, and you'll also see links to some Facebook Live episodes that I've done on the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/salesqualia. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening. This is Scott Sambucci, and you've been listening to the Startup Selling Podcast, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Have a great day. We'll do it next time.